The city rose like a divided drum, beaten on two sides at once. On one side, tall glass buildings caught the sun and threw it back into the sky, shining with promise and hunger. On the other, cracked earth homes sat low and patient, their walls tired but standing, holding stories older than the roads that cut through them. Car horns mixed with the call of street sellers. Dust clung to shoes even as polished cars passed by. It was a place where tomorrow chased today, and yesterday refused to die. In this city lived a woman most people did not notice. She walked softly, her eyes often lowered, her steps careful, as if the ground itself deserved respect. Her clothes were clean but simple, her voice calm and rarely raised. When people passed her, they remembered the air more than her face. She had learned early that silence could keep peace and patience could keep you alive. Like many before her, she carried her strength inside, hidden where no one thought to look. Elders had shaped her with quiet lessons. An old woman once told her, "The river that makes no noise still reaches the sea." She remembered that. She woke before dawn, greeted the day with prayer, and honored customs others had begun to mock. Where the city valued speed, she valued steadiness. Where it praised noise, she trusted calm. Her dignity was not loud, but it was unbroken. Her husband was cut from a different cloth. Hunger had chased him through childhood, and shame had followed close behind. He had slept in crowded rooms and promised himself he would never return there. Money became his shield, status his language. Each step upward felt like escape. Each memory of poverty felt like a threat. "I worked too hard to be looked down on again," he often said, straightening his jacket before meetings. Applause fed him. Approval guided him. He believed respect came from what people could see, not what they could feel. Their marriage had not grown from laughter or deep talks under moonlight. It was arranged by pressure, by questions from family, by fear of being alone. Two lives tied together because society said it was time. They shared a roof, not hearts. At night, silence lay between them, heavy but familiar. The city watched them without care, glass and dust unmoved, as the ancestors listened quietly, already counting the steps toward what was to come. From the day she entered her husband's family house, the air around her was never warm. Smiles came thin and short, like greetings given out of duty, not welcome. When she served food, hands took the plates without thanks. When she spoke, eyes shifted away. In that house, her calm nature was not called dignity, it was called weakness. One evening, as she poured tea, her mother-in-law clicked her tongue softly. "She is too quiet," the woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. "A woman who has nothing to say has nothing to offer." Another aunt laughed. "And look at her clothes. Simple like village dust. How will this one lift our family name?" The wife heard every word. She always did. But she lowered her head and continued pouring, as she had been taught. Her silence fed their judgment. They believed she was small because she did not fight back. They believed she was poor because she did not boast. "She is holding our son back," an uncle said one night, tapping his walking stick against the floor. "A man rising should not carry such weight." Her husband said nothing. His silence cut deeper than their words. What none of them knew, what no one in that house could imagine, was the blood that ran quietly through her veins. A bloodline buried deep beneath shame and secrets. She was the daughter of a woman whose name once shook boardrooms and governments, a woman who built empires with steady hands and an unbreakable will. But long ago, that woman had been forced to choose between power and love, between tradition and truth. The child born from that choice was sent away, erased, spoken of as if she never existed. The wife herself had grown up with only fragments of that truth. A locked box. A faded photograph. A warning from an old caretaker who once whispered, "Some names are too heavy to carry in daylight." That name, her mother's name, was still feared. In elite circles, it was never spoken loudly. When it surfaced, conversations stopped. Doors closed. People leaned in. The city remembered her as a force, not a woman. As a shadow that once ruled the light. And now, unseen and unrecognized, her daughter washed dishes in a house that despised her. Above it all, the ancestors watched. They watched from the spaces between breath and heartbeat. They had seen this story before, how pride walks fast, how truth walks slow. They did not rush. They never did. Meanwhile, the husband's life was changing. Invitations began to arrive. Heavy doors opened. He stepped into rooms he had once only dreamed of, rooms filled with polished shoes, expensive laughter, and promises whispered over crystal glasses. Politicians nodded at him. Businessmen called him brother. Success wrapped itself around his shoulders like a fine coat. "Your future is bright," one man told him, raising a glass. "You belong here." Each word fed his hunger. Each handshake pushed his past further away. In those rooms, no one asked about character. They asked about numbers, connections, power. And each time he returned home, the sight of his quiet wife felt heavier. Not because she had changed, but because he had. "She reminds me of where I came from," he thought, frustration tightening his chest. "And I don't want to go back." Gratitude faded. Pride took its place. He forgot the nights she stood by him when nothing worked. Forgot the prayers whispered for his success. All he saw now was what the world might say if she stood beside him in those shining rooms. Outside, the city moved on, glass rising, dust settling, while fate gathered itself, patient and unafraid, waiting for the right moment to speak. As his name began to carry weight, her presence began to feel lighter in his eyes, not gentle, not peaceful, but unwanted. When she stood beside him, quiet and modest, he felt as if a shadow followed him into rooms filled with bright lights and loud praise. People clapped for him, smiled at him, called him successful. Then their eyes drifted to her, and the clapping softened. In his heart, a dangerous thought grew. She does not belong here anymore. At gatherings, the noise was cruel. Women dressed in gold laughed behind painted hands. Men glanced at her simple dress and raised their brows. "Is that his wife?" one voice whispered, not caring who heard. "She looks like she missed the invitation," another replied, laughter spilling like spilled wine. She felt every word land on her skin. Her hands trembled as she held her bag close to her chest. She tried to smile, the way elders taught her, to meet insult with calm. But calm did not protect her that night. It only made the laughter sharper. "Why is she so quiet?" a woman asked loudly. "Does she not know how to speak?" Another added, "Maybe silence is all she owns." The crowd watched, amused, as if her discomfort were part of the evening's entertainment. She turned slowly toward her husband, waiting. Once, he would have stepped forward. Once, he would have said, "That is my wife. Show respect." But this time, he adjusted his jacket and looked away. His silence rang louder than their laughter. In that moment, she learned a painful truth. A person can be abandoned while standing right beside the one they love. Later, behind closed doors, his family gathered like judges. Old voices filled the room, heavy with authority but twisted by greed. "A man's wife should lift his name," an elder said. "Tradition supports strength, not softness." Another nodded. "Look at other women. They shine. They open doors. This one closes them." They spoke as if she were not flesh and breath, but an object dragging him backward. "She blocks your destiny," they whispered, one by one, planting doubt like seeds. "Patience is weakness," said one. "Loyalty is poverty," said another. "Choose a woman of value," they urged. Their words followed him home, crept into his thoughts, and settled where gratitude once lived. Inside the house, the air grew cold. She cooked, cleaned, prayed, yet felt invisible. Conversations passed over her head. Decisions were made without her. Love, once thin, now starved quietly. Shared walls could not warm what hearts refused to hold. She sat alone some nights, listening to the silence, remembering an old saying, "When a house forgets kindness, even fire cannot warm it." Outside, the ancestors listened. And somewhere beyond sight, the wheel of justice turned, slow but certain. She rose before the sun, the smell of burning sage and dried herbs filling the small room where dust mixed with morning light. Hands folded, eyes lowered, she whispered prayers learned from grandmothers and elders who had spoken of rivers, winds, and unseen watchers. The world outside mocked such rituals, laughing at silence, calling patience weakness, but here, in quiet devotion, she found shelter. She touched the old calabash that held water from the sacred river and let it hum softly beneath her palms, remembering the words, "The earth listens when people do not." Meanwhile, in rooms where light reflected off polished floors and laughter rolled like thunder, Her husband noticed her absence less and less. His attention turned to a woman whose entrance could not be ignored. She shimmered in gold, spoke with voices like music, and laughed so loudly the walls seemed to shake. Every hand reached toward her, every eye followed her, every man waited to measure her worth against their own. She is remarkable, the husband thought, watching her move. She commands attention. She deserves the life we've built. He convinced himself that wealth and shine meant substance, that the world's approval equaled truth. Slowly, carefully, he began to believe that loyalty meant little when brightness promised so much. Desire and destiny became tangled, and the voice of his wife, once steady, grew distant in his mind. At night, the quiet woman slept fitfully. Dreams rose like storms from her ancestors' whispers. She saw calabashes shattered across parched earth, heard voices calling without sound, and felt winds that carried both warning and promise. Her heart tightened with knowledge she could not yet name, that truths long buried beneath shame and dust were stirring. Then came the event that would shift everything. A grand business gala, chandeliers glittering like stars above polished floors. The city's elite gathered, eyes sharp and mouths sharper. Her husband, confident in his climb, stood tall, but disaster waited in the wings. A contract went missing, a detail overlooked, a public failure magnified. Eyes that once celebrated him now searched for fault. And there she was, standing quietly in the corner, unassuming, visible only because the world needed someone to blame. "She's supposed to notice these things," he whispered, though his voice was nearly drowned by murmurs. "Why didn't she see? Why did she not prevent this?" His accusations struck the quiet woman like cold wind. She said nothing. She had learned that silence can be stronger than words, even when the world wants to punish patience. But in his mind, her calm became guilt, her loyalty became weakness, and her silence was now the perfect vessel for all he refused to face in himself. Outside, the ancestors watched, stirring like wind through reeds. They did not rush, but their eyes were everywhere, and the broken calabashes in her dreams whispered that justice often moves slowly, but it always moves. He woke that morning with his mind sharp and his pride sharper. The weight of ambition pressed on him like a drum, loud and insistent. In his eyes, her quiet presence had become a stain, a mark of the poverty he once feared and now believed he had escaped. He could not see her dignity. He could not remember the loyalty that had carried him through hunger and humiliation. "You will not hold me back," he said, voice low but hard, the words cutting like the dry wind through the city streets. "Go. Take nothing, stay nothing. You are not fit for this life." She did not speak. She simply nodded, as she had always learned to do when words could not serve justice. She gathered her few belongings, her hands steady, her back straight. No jewels, no money, no defense. Only her pride, her silence, and the quiet strength that the world had never seen. She left the house without a single protest, leaving behind walls that had never held her heart. Outside, the city swallowed her small figure, but destiny was already moving in the shadows. Forces unseen began their course, pulling threads of fate along paths she could not yet see. While she walked quietly through narrow alleys and forgotten corners, murmurs began to rise elsewhere, whispers among the powerful, traveling from office to office, from mansion to mansion, signaling that something heavy had shifted beneath the city's polished surface. It was then that the news came. The giant of wealth, the woman whose name alone could still make kingdoms tremble, had died. Her passing shook the foundations of business, politics, and high society, like a drumbeat that rattled even the most fortified walls. Markets slowed, politicians gathered, and flags were lowered. People paused, breathing in the absence of a woman whose influence had shaped lives both seen and unseen. Even those who had once thought themselves untouchable felt the tremor. Death had reminded them all that power was a gift, not a shield, and that ancestors' eyes watch longer than men's. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the city, the woman who had been cast out moved through dust and silence, carrying the truth her husband could not yet imagine, the truth that destiny walks in parallel, and that one day, what is hidden will be revealed. Behind heavy wooden doors carved with ancestral symbols, the elders gathered, their voices low but purposeful. Legal advisors in crisp suits sat alongside griots and village elders, each representing a different form of authority, the old ways and the new laws of the land, blending like rivers converging. Paperwork, seals, and records were spread across the table, but it was the stories whispered in shadows, the memories buried by fear, that held the greatest weight. "This truth has been hidden too long," murmured an elder, fingers drumming lightly on the carved tabletop. "It is time to call what was buried into the light." The lawyer nodded, breaking the ancient wax seal. As the parchment unfolded, the names etched in precise script revealed a secret long denied. A daughter, thought lost, cast away in silence, had survived the shame of her birth. Eyes widened. A hush swept the room, as though the ancestors themselves leaned in to hear. "She lives," said one, voice trembling. "The child we whispered of. She is here." The numbers followed, the wealth, the lands, the empires built by hands long gone. 80 billion, they read aloud, a sum so vast that even seasoned financiers blinked in disbelief. Every office, every estate, every investment was bequeathed entirely to her. The air seemed to shimmer, the gravity of the revelation pressing down on every soul in the room. "Power passes to her," said an elder, lifting his eyes to meet the others. "The child once cast away is now the keeper of the forest. Every judgment against her life is overturned. The seed abandoned has grown strong enough to inherit the land." From this council, the hunt began. Lawyers traced property records, investigators followed whispers and letters, and elders called upon memory and ancestral guidance. They traveled through towns, across rivers, and into remote villages, seeking the rightful heir. Every clue pulled them closer, every story of kindness or resilience pointing to the quiet woman who had lived in the shadow of ignorance. Unaware of the storm gathering above her name, she walked the streets softly. She helped neighbors carry water, offered a smile to the lonely child, and gave food to the elders. Her life remained small, modest, and unassuming. Pain had not hardened her. Rejection had not twisted her heart. She shared what little she had without thought of return, reminding those who witnessed her that true wealth is not counted in coins but in character. And in the soil, hidden from sight, a seed pressed against darkness began to push upward. A sprout broke free, reaching toward the light, a silent, powerful testament that patience, humility, and endurance are seen by those who truly watch. Somewhere, the wind carried the faint whispers of the ancestors. "You have waited. You have endured. Now justice rises in your name." The room fell silent as the final names were read aloud. She stood at the center, calm and composed, while elders and officials confirmed what the world had long refused to see. The papers, inked and sealed for decades, finally spoke the truth. She was the daughter of a woman whose wealth and influence had shaped nations, a child thought lost, now officially named and recognized. Murmurs swept through the chamber, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and the trembling weight of destiny finally unveiled. An elder stepped forward, hand resting on the carved table, eyes steady. "Blood remembers," he said. "Even when men and women forget, the ancestors do not. This child carries the lineage that was denied. Let none dispute it." His voice carried the authority of centuries, the weight of tradition binding law and lore alike. She bowed slightly, accepting the recognition without a word of triumph. Her gaze moved across those who once dismissed her, not in hatred, but in quiet understanding. No fanfare, no angry declarations, just a soft grace that flowed from years of patience and endurance. It was a strength that demanded no applause, a power that did not shout but simply existed, undeniable and whole. Those expecting fury and revenge stiffened in surprise. Their minds, trained to equate sudden wealth with sudden cruelty, struggled to grasp the calm dignity she carried. Instead of lashing out, she nodded to the elders, offered a gentle smile to those present, and held herself like a river that cannot be disturbed. By the time news spilled beyond the chamber, the city itself seemed to pause. Streets, markets, and towers buzzed with the shock of discovery. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Merchants whispered behind counters, officials in glass offices stared at screens, and the hum of life in the city shifted as the revelation spread. The quiet woman, long ignored, was now the heiress to unimaginable power. Cameras turned toward her, journalists reaching for words, politicians adjusting their statements, and socialites bending toward recognition. Every eye that had once overlooked her now sought her approval, every voice that had mocked her now struggled to bow. The woman who had moved silently through life now moved through a city awakened, a city that would remember that respect follows not just power, but patience, dignity, and the long, steady force of justice. He sat in the great hall, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and fading incense, when the name was spoken. His heart froze as the truth hit him with the force of a drum echoing through the valleys. She is the heiress," he whispered, voice trembling. A man who once measured respect in applause and power, now realizing the one he cast out was the very woman he should have honored. His ambition, the empire he had built, felt suddenly hollow. The laughter that once buoyed him now seemed distant, replaced by the harsh echo of regret. Every banquet, every nod of approval, every smile from a sycophant meant nothing against the weight of truth. I failed," he murmured, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Success without honor, without humility, had left him exposed, alone, and shivering in shame. Around him, those who had sneered at her, the whispers, the snide glances, the laughter at her modest clothes, now lowered their eyes. They shuffled, quieted by the invisible hand of justice that had waited patiently for this day. The elders nodded subtly, knowing the lesson of pride bending before truth had been written once more across human hearts. Finally he sank to his knees, the grand man brought low, his pride stripped bare. "Forgive me," he breathed, not from love, not from understanding, but from the raw ache of loss and the emptiness of ambition pursued without care. An elder stepped forward, voice firm yet calm. A heart guided by wealth alone forgets the ways of the ancestors. Tradition remembers when men forget. Outside, the city hummed with gossip and wonder, while inside, the silent clash of values played its final note. Greed and status could not overcome patience, humility, and ancestral justice. Love measured against ambition faltered, choices made in haste and pride revealed their cost. She stood, calm as dawn breaking over the dusted streets, eyes steady, hands folded. Her heart carried scars, yes, but she did not break. Every betrayal, every whispered insult, every act of abandonment had been absorbed and transformed into quiet strength. She did not raise her voice, did not strike back, did not dance in vengeance. Justice had spoken without sound, and the ancestors, invisible but present, nodded in approval. The hall was still. The man kneeling, the elders watching, the city learning. Silence, patient and profound, had delivered its verdict. It was a reminder, the ancestors do not rush, but they never forget. She stood on the balcony of the family estate, the city below buzzing with whispers and awe. The wind carried the scent of dust and polished stone, reminding her that power was not always loud, nor justice always visible. She could have demanded vengeance, humiliated those who had scorned her, made the husband pay in a public spectacle. But she did not. "Let it be," she whispered to herself, the words soft but firm, as if the ancestors themselves had guided her hand. Strength is quiet. Wisdom does not shout. Her dignity was untouchable. No wealth, no insult, no betrayal could strip her of what had been forged in patience, prayer, and the silence of generations. Every slight, every rejection, every mocking glance had been absorbed and turned into armor of character. Meanwhile, the husband wandered through his empty halls, once echoing with the laughter of acclaim and approval. Now they only reflected the hollowness of ambition untempered by loyalty. He touched the mahogany walls as if wealth itself could soothe the wounds of his pride, but the cold stone beneath his feet reminded him, money cannot buy back respect lost, nor can it rebuild a heart abandoned. From the estate, she called for the elders, the teachers, the families who had long struggled unseen. Schools were funded, homes repaired, food delivered to those forgotten by the city's hunger for prestige. Her inheritance became more than gold, it became a river nourishing the land, a seed planted for generations. In her mother's village, elders nodded with quiet satisfaction. "She honors the bloodline," one said, eyes reflecting the son's gold. The mother's name, once silenced by scandal and fear, now lived in deeds, in truth, in service. Fear was replaced with respect, whispers replaced with gratitude, and the world remembered not a tyrant of wealth, but a woman of patience and principle. The city could watch, the elites could whisper, and the husband could linger in the ruins of his vanity. But she moved forward, steady and serene, proving that power guided by wisdom, humility, and ancestral guidance changes the world without shouting, without malice, without fear. Her silence was her voice, her restraint, her revolution. And in that quiet, the ancestors smiled. The woman knelt beneath the ancient baobab, the roots curling like the fingers of ancestors long gone. Her hands moved through the earth with quiet reverence, leaving small offerings of kola nuts and water. "Your eyes have seen," she whispered to the wind. Your hands have guided. She bowed her head, feeling the pulse of those who came before her, those who had watched silently when injustice seemed to triumph. The city's noise faded, only the heartbeat of history remained. Poverty had once followed her like a shadow, but she now understood it was only a season, not a curse. Her modest home, her simple clothes, the empty spaces left by betrayal, they had not defined her. Strength had been hidden in patience, wisdom in silence, and greatness in humility. Far above, the husband paced in his empty tower. The choices he had made, the whispers he had followed, the loyalty he had scorned, had returned to him. He felt the weight of his betrayal like stones in his chest. Every alliance he thought solid, every applause he had sought, now echoed hollowly against walls built on fear rather than respect. Below, the streets carried on. Merchants hawked their wares, children ran between dusty alleys, and the city hummed its usual rhythm. Yet one woman had risen from its overlooked corners, standing taller than any tower, her dignity a monument the world could not ignore. Her eyes lifted, quiet but unshakable, knowing that destiny had finally recognized her. The ancestors, once restless in their silence, now seemed to breathe easier. The scales balanced, the debt of pride and neglect returned to those who deserved it. Harmony settled like morning mist over the city. The unseen eyes of the past rested, satisfied that justice had found its rightful path, and the cycle of wisdom continued, unbroken. "Thank you," she whispered, to those who had watched from the shadows. "I am ready to live, to give, and to honor what was always mine." And with that, the city remained, unchanged and bustling, yet beneath its surface, a quiet revolution had taken place. One woman had walked through betrayal, poverty, and silence, and emerged as a testament to the enduring power of patience, character, and the watchful eyes of the ancestors.